The world never saw it coming, not at first. There had been murmurs on the news, whispers of an outbreak in isolated villages, but nobody paid attention. It was just another disease, another foreign problem, until it wasn't. Dr. Daniel Carter had spent the last 5 years researching deadly pathogens, but nothing prepared him for what he saw under his microscope in the government's top-secret lab. The virus, designated ZV-01, was unlike anything in history. It attacked the central nervous system, reanimated dead cells, and turned its host into mindless, flesh-hungry husks within hours. It was spreading fast, faster than any containment measures could handle. In New York City, Police Officer Mark Reynolds responded to a call about a violent attack in a subway station. The sight that greeted him would haunt him forever. A man, his face covered in blood, gnawing on another passenger's throat. When Mark and his partner tried to intervene, the attacker lunged at them with unnatural speed. They shot him 5 times, but he kept coming. Only a headshot stopped him. By the time backup arrived, the subway was a slaughterhouse. Meanwhile, Emily West, a single mother, watched from her apartment window as sirens blared outside. The news anchors looked pale, their voices strained. "Stay indoors. Lock your doors and windows. Do not attempt to approach the infected." Panic gripped the city as the government declared a state of emergency. Dr. Carter had seen the reports. He knew containment had failed. The infection wasn't localized. It had reached London, Paris, Beijing. Humanity had days, maybe hours, before the collapse. He tried to warn his superiors, but the lab was abruptly locked down. "You're not going anywhere," a soldier told him, gripping his rifle. Then, the power failed. And in the darkness, Carter heard the screaming. Mark's precinct was overwhelmed within hours. The infected flooded the streets, attacking anything that moved. Mark barely managed to escape, but his partner wasn't so lucky. Bloodied and exhausted, he hijacked a police cruiser and sped toward the suburbs, desperate to find safety. Emily's nightmare began when a neighbor pounded on her door, begging for help. The woman's husband had been bitten, and now he was convulsing, his eyes rolling back. Emily backed away in horror as the man twitched violently, then lunged at his wife, tearing into her flesh. Grabbing her daughter, Emily fled through the fire escape, the sounds of death echoing through the apartment complex. By midnight, New York was in flames. The National Guard was deployed, but their bullets only delayed the inevitable. The infected kept coming. Civilians rioted, looted, and turned on one another. Dr. Carter escaped the lab through a maintenance tunnel, determined to find someone who would listen to him. But as he emerged into the city, he saw the truth. Civilization was already lost. This wasn't an outbreak. It was an extinction event. The world was ending, and there was no stopping it. Dr. Daniel Carter moved through the burning streets of New York, his heart pounding with each step. Sirens blared in the distance, but they were slowly fading, overwhelmed by the unearthly screams of the infected. He clutched his backpack, filled with hastily gathered research notes, hoping they would be useful to someone. Anyone. But deep down, he knew the truth. Science had already lost. Across the city, Mark Reynolds gripped the steering wheel of his police cruiser, weaving between abandoned cars and bodies sprawled across the streets. His radio was filled with chaos, officers calling for backup, desperate screams, and then, silence. He was alone now. The city's emergency services had collapsed in a matter of hours. The precinct was gone. His fellow officers, either dead or worse. His destination? His sister's apartment in Brooklyn. But as he turned onto the bridge, a wall of wrecked vehicles blocked his way. Smoke filled the air, and something far worse than fire awaited him on the other side, hundreds of them, shambling forward, drawn by the sound of his car's engine. Shit! He threw the car into reverse just as the first infected slammed against the hood, its pale, bloodied hands clawing at the windshield. Meanwhile, Emily West held her 6-year-old daughter, Lily, close as they ran through the alleyways behind their apartment complex. She had no plan, only the primal instinct to survive. The infected swarmed the streets, attacking anyone they could catch. The news had said to stay inside, to lock their doors, but Emily had watched her neighbors die doing just that. Lily sobbed softly into her shoulder. "Where's Daddy?" Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. She couldn't tell her daughter the truth, that her husband, who had left for work that morning, was likely dead or one of them. "We'll find him," she whispered instead. A scream echoed nearby. Emily flattened herself against the brick wall, peeking around the corner. A young man was sprinting toward them, eyes wild with terror. Behind him, a swarm of infected surged forward, closing the distance fast. "No," Emily muttered. If the man saw them, he'd lead the monsters straight to them. The decision was instant. She grabbed Lily and bolted through the back entrance of a grocery store. Inside, it was eerily silent, shelves overturned, blood smeared across the floor. The emergency lights flickered weakly. Emily moved carefully, trying not to make a sound. Then thump. She froze. Something was in here with them. Dr. Carter wasn't faring much better. His goal was simple: get out of the city. But every bridge, every highway was jammed. Helicopters flew overhead, their loudspeakers urging people to stay calm. But there was no calm left in New York. The infection had spread too fast. People weren't just fleeing from the undead anymore, they were fighting each other. Gunfire erupted nearby. He ducked into a convenience store just as a group of looters stormed past, carrying stolen supplies. It was no longer about survival. It was about desperation. That's when he saw her. A woman and a child, hiding behind a toppled display of canned goods. Emily's wide eyes met his. In that instant, neither of them spoke, but both knew the truth: staying alone meant dying. Then the store doors burst open. A lone infected staggered inside, its hollow eyes locking onto Emily and Lily. It let out a guttural snarl and lunged. Carter reacted instantly, grabbing a nearby metal rod and swinging it with everything he had. The impact sent the creature crashing into the shelves, but it wasn't enough. It was already clawing its way back up. Emily grabbed Lily and ran. Carter followed. "Wait!" he called, catching up to her in the back alley. "You need help." Emily hesitated. She didn't trust strangers, especially now. But what choice did she have? Another growl sounded behind them. "Fine. Let's go!" Elsewhere, Mark abandoned his police car, fighting his way through the side streets of Brooklyn. Every turn was a nightmare: people screaming, buildings burning, the dead roaming freely. He barely had enough ammo left. Then he heard it. A military broadcast on a still-functioning radio. "This is the U.S. Army Safe Zone broadcasting on emergency frequency. Refuge and security available at Fort Hamilton. Proceed with caution." A safe zone. Mark knew it was a long shot, but it was better than nothing. He had to get there. And maybe, just maybe, he'd find other survivors willing to fight. As dawn broke over the ruined city, the survivors each had a path, but none of them knew the horrors that awaited them outside the crumbling walls of New York. The last days of order were over. The true nightmare was just beginning. The sun rose over New York, casting an eerie glow over the crumbling city. Smoke curled from burning buildings, and the streets were littered with abandoned cars, shattered glass, and bodies, both human and something else. Dr. Daniel Carter, Emily West, and her daughter Lily moved cautiously through the back streets, avoiding main roads where the infected gathered in droves. Every sound made Emily flinch. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Lily clung tightly to her mother's hand, her once bright eyes now hollow with fear. They had one goal: get out of the city. "The military is supposed to have safe zones," Carter said, glancing at a radio he had scavenged. "Fort Hamilton is the closest one." Emily looked skeptical. "And what if it's already fallen?" Carter hesitated. She had a point. Nothing was certain anymore. Still, they had to try. The road to Fort Hamilton. Across the city, Mark Reynolds pushed forward on foot, his police uniform torn, his handgun low on ammo. He had one mission: get to the safe zone. As he navigated through an abandoned highway, he stumbled upon a convoy of military trucks, riddled with bullet holes and claw marks. The soldiers inside were dead, or worse. Carefully, he searched the wreckage. He found an M4 rifle, extra ammo, and a military-grade radio still broadcasting weekly. "Fort Hamilton, overrun, do not approach." Mark's stomach sank. The safe zone was gone. Before he could react, a sound made him freeze. A low, guttural growl. Turning slowly, he saw them, at least a dozen infected emerging from the wreckage. Bloodied uniforms. Hollow eyes. Former soldiers who had become the very thing they were fighting. Mark didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and opened fire. The shots echoed across the freeway as the first wave dropped, but more were coming. Mark sprinted toward an overturned truck, leaping onto its roof just as the creatures swarmed below. He was trapped. The fall of Fort Hamilton. Back in Brooklyn, Carter and Emily reached the outskirts of Fort Hamilton, where they expected to find shelter and soldiers. Instead, they found hell. Bodies lined the fences. Military vehicles smoldered. The once secure base was nothing more than a slaughterhouse. Lily whimpered, and Emily pulled her close. "What now?" Carter didn't answer. He was too busy scanning the area, looking for survivors. Then movement. A soldier, barely clinging to life, slumped against a barricade. His uniform was soaked in blood. Carter rushed to him. "Hey! What happened?" The soldier coughed, his eyes glassy. "They got in, too many, we couldn't hold." He grabbed Carter's shirt. "They're not just mindless. They're learning. Some are faster, stronger." Then his grip loosened. His body went limp. He was dead. Or so they thought. Emily gasped as the soldier's eyes snapped open, now milky white, and he lunged at Carter. A gunshot rang out. Mark stood at the gate, his rifle smoking. "Glad I found you guys," he muttered. No more safe havens. They had made it to Fort Hamilton. But the truth was clear now. There were no more safe zones. No government. No rescue coming. The world had already fallen. And they were on their own. The wind howled through the broken remains of Fort Hamilton as Mark, Emily, Lily, and Dr. Carter stood among the dead. Smoke and the sickening stench of rotting flesh filled the air. What was supposed to be their salvation had become yet another graveyard. "No more safe zones," Mark muttered, tightening his grip on his rifle. "We're screwed." Dr. Carter exhaled sharply. "There has to be something, another military site, a research facility. Someone has to be working on a cure." Emily looked at him. "A cure? That won't help if we don't survive the night." Carter didn't respond. She was right. They needed food, shelter, weapons, and most importantly, a plan. No time to rest. They moved through the remains of the base, searching for anything useful. Mark found extra ammunition, while Emily scavenged medical supplies. Carter checked a half-functioning radio, but all he got was static. Then, a voice broke through. "Operational bunker, survivors, northwest of the city, safety." The signal cut out. Carter turned to the others. "Did you hear that? There's a bunker." Mark frowned. "Could be real. Could be a trap." Emily sighed. "What choice do we have?" Before anyone could answer, a low growl echoed through the air. They weren't alone. Ambushed. From the shadows, the infected emerged. Some still wore tattered military uniforms, their vacant eyes locked onto the group. But something was different. They weren't just aimlessly wandering, they were stalking. "They're getting smarter," Carter whispered. Mark raised his rifle. "Run! Now!" The group sprinted through the wreckage as the creatures gave chase. Emily held Lily tightly, pushing forward as fast as she could. Mark fired behind them, dropping 2 of the undead, but more kept coming. Then, something worse happened. Gunfire erupted from a nearby rooftop, but not from the infected. Mark barely dodged a bullet as it whizzed past his head. "What the hell?" a voice called out. "Drop your weapons! Supplies belong to us now." Raiders. The world wasn't just overrun by the dead. The living had turned against each other too. Trapped between two evils. With the undead closing in and the raiders blocking their escape, there was nowhere to run. Mark grabbed a smoke grenade from a fallen soldier's vest. "Cover your eyes!" He pulled the pin and tossed it. Smoke filled the air, disorienting both the raiders and the infected. "Go!" Mark shouted. They sprinted through the chaos, weaving between wrecked vehicles and debris. Shots rang out, but they didn't stop. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a crumbling warehouse on the outskirts of the base and barricaded the doors. For now they were safe. But outside, both the living and the dead were still hunting them. And this was only the beginning. The warehouse was dark, silent except for their heavy breathing. Mark pressed his back against the door, gripping his rifle. The raiders were still out there. So were the infected. Emily clutched Lily tightly, whispering reassurances even as fear clouded her own mind. Dr. Carter peered through a broken window. Figures moved in the distance, both human and inhuman. The raiders had taken cover on the rooftops, while the undead lurked in the alleys, sniffing for prey. "We can't stay here," Carter whispered. "No shit," Mark muttered. "But unless you know how to turn invisible, we're stuck." A desperate plan. Emily took a deep breath. "What about the tunnels?" Mark turned to her. "Tunnels?" She nodded. "Subway tunnels. They run beneath the city. If we find an entrance, we can move without the raiders spotting us." Mark thought about it. The tunnels could work, but they had their own dangers. "You realize what's probably down there, right?" "Zombies," Carter said. Emily met Mark's eyes. "They're everywhere. Above ground, we'll be gunned down or ripped apart. At least down there, we have a chance." Mark sighed, reloading his rifle. "Fine. Let's move." The descent into darkness. They slipped out through a back exit, keeping low as they navigated the ruined streets. The smell of death hung in the air. The subway entrance was only a few blocks away. But getting there wouldn't be easy. As they crept past an overturned bus, a rusted can rolled across the pavement. Everyone froze. Then, a gunshot. The raiders had spotted them. "Run!" Mark shouted. Bullets rained down as they sprinted toward the subway entrance. Mark fired back, dropping one of the attackers. The gunfire attracted the infected. From the side streets, they came, dozens of them. Snarling, hungry. Now the raiders had a bigger problem than them. Taking advantage of the chaos, Mark, Emily, Carter, and Lily lunged down the subway stairs just as a horde of zombies swarmed the raiders. They barely made it inside before Emily slammed the gate shut behind them. The subway graveyard. The tunnels were silent. Almost too silent. Their flashlights flickered across the walls, revealing dried blood and old bones. People had tried to escape here before, but they hadn't made it. Lily whimpered. Emily hushed her, holding her close. "We need to move," Carter whispered. "Before we find out what killed them." They pressed forward, deeper into the tunnels. The echoes of distant growls sent shivers down their spines. But the worst was yet to come. Because in the darkness ahead, something was waiting. And it wasn't human. The air in the subway tunnels was thick with the musty scent of decay. Mark led the way, his flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. Every creak of the rails, every distant echo felt like a warning. Carter moved cautiously, eyes scanning the shadows. "Stay close. There's something down here. I can feel it." Emily clutched Lily tightly, the girl's face buried in her mother's shoulder. The flickering light cast grotesque shadows across the tunnel walls, making every crack and bend seem like a potential hiding place for something far worse than the undead. Suddenly, a low growl echoed from ahead. Mark's hand shot up, signaling the group to stop. "Did you hear that?" Emily whispered, voice trembling. "I heard it," Mark replied, voice steady. "But I don't think it's zombies." Carter's eyes narrowed. "No. It's something else. Something worse than zombies." As they moved deeper into the bowels of the city, the air grew colder. The growls became louder, but this time there was a distinct sound of something scraping against metal. Mark slowed his pace, trying to make sense of the noises, when suddenly, a shape appeared in the darkness. It wasn't one of the usual mindless, stumbling infected. This was faster, more predatory. It crouched on the ceiling like a spider, its emaciated body covered in tattered remnants of clothing. The eyes, glowing pale yellow, locked onto them as its mouth parted in a grotesque snarl. "Shit!" Mark hissed. "That's not just any zombie. That's Evolve," Carter muttered. "A mutation." The creature hissed and dropped from the ceiling, landing with a sickening thud in front of them. It bared its teeth, too many teeth, and lunged at Carter. Mark fired instinctively, hitting the creature in the shoulder, but it barely flinched. Emily screamed as the creature came at them, claws scraping along the concrete. Mark grabbed Carter, pulling him back. "Move! We need to go!" They bolted down the tunnel, the mutated zombie in pursuit, its screeches filling the air. An underground maze. They raced through the tunnels, the creature's footsteps echoing behind them. But as they turned a corner, they found themselves at a dead end. A large, rusted grate blocked their path. "We can't stop here!" Emily shouted, panic setting in. "There has to be a way through," Carter said, scrambling to the grate. He pulled at it, but it wouldn't budge. The screeches grew louder. "Help me!" Carter yelled, throwing his weight against the grate. Mark and Emily joined him, but it was no use. The creature was nearly upon them. Then, as if answering their prayers, a loud crash echoed from down the tunnel. Another growl. But this time, it wasn't the mutated zombie. The horde of regular infected appeared, their numbers overwhelming the mutant. The two groups collided in a frenzy of biting and tearing flesh. The mutated zombie fought back savagely, but it was outnumbered. The fight was brutal, the sounds of tearing flesh and growls filling the space. Mark didn't hesitate. He grabbed the crowbar from his pack and swung it hard, smashing the grate open. "Go! Now!" Into the dark. They ran through the narrow opening, and behind them, the chaos of the infected and the mutated continued. It wasn't just zombies. There was something else, something evolving, adapting. They didn't look back. As they moved deeper into the tunnels, Emily struggled to keep up with the others. Lily was growing weaker, her small body exhausted from the stress and fear. "We need to find a safe place to rest," Emily said between labored breaths. "We don't have time for that," Mark shot back, his voice tight. "We need to keep moving." But just as he said it, a shrill scream echoed down the tunnel. They froze, turning to see a group of undead children stumbling toward them. Their once innocent faces were now twisted in hunger, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "Not again," Carter whispered. "We have to move now." Emily, desperate, turned down a narrow corridor. The group followed her, hoping it would lead to an exit. The dark, labyrinthine tunnels offered no answers, only more questions. The nightmare was far from over, and in the dark depths of the city, it seemed the creatures were only getting smarter, stronger, more numerous. The darkest hour. As they stumbled through the tunnels, a horrible realization hit them: there was nowhere left to run. The infected were evolving faster than they could adapt. And no matter how far they traveled, the underground wasn't the sanctuary they had hoped for. Their only option was to keep moving, to find a place, any place, that could offer the smallest chance of survival. But they were being hunted. And every step they took led them closer to something worse than the undead. Something unpredictable. And in the endless dark, they realized there was no escape. Only survival. The tunnels seemed endless. Each step echoed through the claustrophobic darkness as the group moved cautiously, the oppressive silence broken only by their ragged breathing. Lily was no longer speaking, she had fallen silent hours ago, and Emily could feel the weight of her daughter's exhaustion in the tight grip on her hand. Every step they took deeper into the labyrinth was another step away from hope. "We need to find a way out," Mark said, his voice strained with fatigue. "This is a damn maze." Carter had been scanning their surroundings, his eyes tired but alert. "There are maintenance tunnels up ahead. I think they lead to the surface." "Are you sure?" Emily asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. They have to, Carter replied, though his words lacked conviction. The group had no choice but to follow, pushing on in the dark, the oppressive weight of the underground pressing down on them like a physical force. It felt like the world above had already forgotten them. The worst of humanity. After what seemed like hours of winding corridors, they reached the maintenance tunnels. The faint hum of electricity buzzed overhead, flickering lights giving them just enough visibility to move. But as they rounded a corner, they froze. A group of survivors. At first, Emily felt a rush of relief, real people. But as she looked closer, that relief quickly turned to dread. These weren't ordinary survivors. They were hungry. Their eyes were wild with desperation, their faces gaunt from weeks, maybe months of starvation. And they weren't just watching them, they were waiting. Carter stepped forward, trying to keep his voice calm. "We're not looking for trouble. Just a way out." One of the survivors, a man with a jagged scar across his face, stepped forward. "You're not the only ones down here." Mark's eyes narrowed. "We don't want to fight. We just need to get out." The man laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "There's no getting out. Not anymore. The world above's gone. It's just us now." Emily's heart pounded in her chest as the survivors' eyes flicked over them, calculating, predatory. These people were no longer the hopeful, frightened masses they had once been. They had crossed a line. Suddenly, the man lunged forward, grabbing Lily by the arm. "This one'll fetch a good price." Mark reacted instantly, drawing his pistol and aiming it at the man's head. "Let her go." The man grinned, showing teeth that were too sharp. "You don't get it. Down here, survival isn't about being kind. It's about being strong." A gunshot rang out. The man fell to the ground, blood spilling across the floor. Carter stood with his own weapon drawn, his face grim. "Move! Now!" The way out? They ran. The sound of footsteps behind them told them the survivors weren't going to let them go easily. But as they fled through the maintenance tunnels, they could hear the distinct sound of something else moving in the darkness. The infected. The growls and screeches came from every direction, closer, faster, angrier. The survivors had unwittingly led them straight into a horde. "Keep going!" Mark shouted, his voice cracking with urgency. They pushed forward, the narrow tunnels growing even darker as the horde closed in behind them. The infected weren't just stumbling, they were charging. Emily stumbled, her breath ragged, but Mark grabbed her arm, pulling her forward. Carter was close behind, but they could all hear the unmistakable sound of the undead gaining ground. Just when they thought they couldn't run any further, they saw it. A door. "Here! This way!" Carter shouted. They barreled through the door, and it slammed shut behind them. They were in another maintenance room, a small, dimly lit space filled with old pipes and electrical boxes. But they weren't safe. The door was already buckling, the infected pounding on the other side. "We need to move." "No," Mark said, his voice taut with fear. But the only way out was up. And that meant climbing. The final escape. Mark found a ladder leading to a hatch above them. "Give me a boost," he said. They hurried, pushing Lily and Emily to the front as Mark climbed first. He made it to the top and pried open the hatch. Fresh air poured in, cold, but real. "Come on!" he yelled down. Carter went next, followed by Emily and finally, Lily. As the last person emerged into the night air, the sounds of the infected below were muffled, but they could still hear them thrashing against the hatch. They were outside. But the world they had known was gone. The city was a war zone, the skyline broken, smoke rising from the ruins. There was no safe place, no sanctuary. But at that moment, the air felt like freedom. They had survived. But they were alone in a world that was no longer their own. The morning sun barely pierced the thick clouds of ash and smoke, casting a dim, eerie light over the city. The air was heavy with the stench of death and decay, but for the first time in what felt like forever, they were outside, their feet on solid ground, free from the suffocating darkness of the tunnels. Mark, Emily, Lily, and Carter stood together, staring out over the city. The towering skyscrapers that once symbolized civilization were now shattered ruins, their jagged outlines cutting through the haze like broken teeth. The streets were empty, save for the occasional body, both human and infected, littering the ground. Mark adjusted his rifle, his eyes hard. "We're not safe here." "No," Carter said quietly, his voice heavy. "None of us are. But we have a chance." Emily glanced at him. "A chance at what? To survive another day?" Carter's eyes met hers. "Yes. That's all we have now." Lily, standing at Emily's side, looked up at the destruction around them, her small face full of confusion. "Is it over?" she asked softly. Emily crouched down, brushing the hair from her daughter's face. "No, sweetheart. It's not over. But we're alive, and that's all that matters right now." The group stood in silence, listening to the distant groans of the undead and the occasional crackling of fire in the ruins. Survival at all costs. Mark's thoughts were consumed with the grim reality they now faced. The world they had once known was gone. The virus, the infected, and the chaos had destroyed everything. It had wiped out governments, families, economies, everything that made the world function. Now, there was only the struggle for survival. The infected had evolved, becoming smarter, faster, and more dangerous. The mutated creatures they'd encountered were only the beginning. And humans? They had become as dangerous as the zombies, driven by fear, hunger, and desperation. In the end, everyone had turned into predators, and the line between the living and the dead was now indistinguishable. Emily's voice broke through his thoughts. "What do we do now?" Mark looked at her, his jaw set. "We move. We keep going. There's a bunker up north that could still be operational. Maybe it'll have supplies, maybe it won't. But we can't stay here." Carter nodded, glancing at the horizon. "We need to keep moving before the raiders or the infected find us. We can't afford to get caught off guard again." Lily's hand tugged at Emily's sleeve. "I'm scared, Mama." Emily pulled her daughter close, holding her tight. "I know, sweetheart. But as long as we're together, we'll keep fighting." They set off, moving cautiously through the ruined streets. Mark led the way, his sharp eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, ready for whatever threat lurked ahead. Behind them, the sound of groaning and shuffling grew fainter, but they knew it wasn't over. The undead were always out there, waiting for their next meal. The new world. As they ventured farther from the city, the landscape shifted. The once bustling urban sprawl gave way to barren fields and overgrown forests, nature reclaiming what humanity had destroyed. Along the way, they encountered remnants of the old world, broken vehicles, abandoned homes, and shattered storefronts, each one a silent witness to the collapse of civilization. But there were no more signs of life. Only the dead. In the distance, they could see the faint outlines of mountains, their last hope for refuge. But it wasn't just the terrain that was changing. Mark could feel something else, something deeper. The way the world felt had shifted. It was no longer just a fight for survival against the infected. It was a battle against the relentless passage of time, against the loss of everything that had once made life worth living. The final decision. Nightfall came swiftly, and they found a secluded spot near a creek. The sounds of the world beyond, the cries of the undead, the rustling of leaves in the wind, were the only things that filled the silence. As the group set up camp, Mark found himself staring into the flames of their small fire. He thought about the world they had lost, the life they had known, the family and friends they had once taken for granted. It was all gone, swept away by the virus. Now, it was just the four of them against the world. Emily sat beside him, her face pale but resolute. "Do you think there's a future?" she asked softly. Mark didn't respond immediately. The question hung in the air, unanswered. "I don't know," he finally said. "But as long as we're breathing, we have to keep going." The fire crackled, its warmth the only comfort they had left. In the distance, they could hear the moans of the undead, still hungry, still searching. But they had learned one thing in this new world: the dead didn't determine their fate. They did. And so, they would continue, not knowing what the next day would bring. But for tonight they were alive. And that was enough.